November 3rd, 1944. Hürtgen Forest, German-Belgian border. Staff Sergeant James Kellerman's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, from the cold, from exhaustion, from firing over 300 rounds through a rifle the Army had tried to bury 6 months earlier. Around him, the 28th Infantry Division, Pennsylvania's own, was being torn apart, not by a single enemy attack, but by something far more insidious. Their weapons were failing. M1 Garand's jamming in the freezing mud. Browning automatic rifles seizing up after the first magazine. In the dense forest, where you couldn't see 15 yards ahead, a jammed rifle meant you had about 4 seconds to fix it. But Kellerman's rifle never jammed. It never overheated. It never stopped feeding. The weapon in his hands had been declared obsolete, impractical, and too expensive to produce. The Ordnance Department had recommended canceling its contract entirely. General Douglas MacArthur's staff had called it a solution in search of a problem. By the time the sun set on November 3rd, that rifle would be the only thing standing between an entire American division and complete encirclement. This is the story of the M1 Carbine and how the weapon nobody wanted became the rifle that nobody could live without. It's spring 1940. Europe is burning. At the U.S. Army Ordnance Department in Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, Major René Studler is reviewing after-action reports from Poland and France. What he's reading doesn't make sense. The data shows something unexpected. Rear echelon troops, radio operators, mortar crews, truck drivers, officers are ending up in close combat far more often than pre-war doctrine predicted. Modern warfare is more fluid, more chaotic. The front line doesn't stay in one place. These soldiers carry the M1911 pistol for self-defense, effective range about 25 yards, maybe. The alternative is the 9-pound M1 Garand rifle. Magnificent weapon, but try operating a radio while carrying it. Try climbing in and out of a Jeep with it strapped to your back. Try maneuvering through thick brush with that 43-inch length catching on every branch. Studler proposes something radical, a new category of weapon, lighter than a rifle, more powerful than a pistol, effective range of 200 yards, semi-automatic fire, weight under 6 pounds. The Ordnance Department issues a formal requirement in October 1940. They give manufacturers 1 year to submit design. What happens next is one of the most chaotic procurement processes in American military history, and it almost destroys the weapon before it ever reaches the field. Winchester, Repeating Arms, receives a solicitation on October 15, 1940. The requirements seem impossible. 6 pounds maximum, use the new .30 caliber cartridge being developed simultaneously. Semi-automatic action, produce it. Cheaper than a standard rifle. And, by the way, submit a working prototype in 6 months. Winchester's chief designer, William Romer, reads the specifications and immediately knows they're in trouble. The carbine they're developing, based on a design by Winchester engineer David Marshall Williams, uses a revolutionary short-stroke gas piston system. Elegant, compact, completely unproven. Williams is difficult. A former convict who designed firearms in a North Carolina prison workshop after conviction for involvement in an agent's passing during a prohibition raid. Brilliant, but volatile. He insists his gas system is the key to everything. Roma has 6 months. He doesn't sleep much that spring. Meanwhile, 9 other manufacturers are working on their own designs. Auto Ordnance Corporation, Harrington Richardson, even General Motors. The competition is intense. The stakes are enormous. A contract for hundreds of thousands of units. May 1941, the trials at Aberdeen Proving Ground. As Winchester's prototype, designated the Winchester G30M, performs flawlessly for the first 3 days. Lightweight, accurate, fast firing. The observers are impressed. Day 4. The gas piston cracks after 1,800 rounds. Day 5. The trigger assembly breaks during mud testing. Day 6. The barrel expands beyond tolerance in sustained fire tests. The Ordnance Department recommendation dated May 28, 1941. Design shows promise, but requires extensive development. Recommend limited procurement only. Not suitable for primary issue. In bureaucratic language, that's a termination notice. But Major Studler doesn't give up. He knows something the bean counters don't. War is coming, and America isn't. He pushes for a small initial contract, 500 units, just enough to keep the design alive, yes? Winchester goes back to the drawing board. Williams redesigns the gas system. Romer strengthens the receiver. The trigger group gets a complete overhaul. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Suddenly, the limited contract becomes an emergency priority. The military needs weapons, any weapons, immediately. But here's the problem. Even after the redesign, the M1 Carbine is experiencing failure rates of nearly 8% in field testing. That's unacceptable. The Ordnance Department begins floating the idea of canceling the program entirely and redirecting production capacity to proven designs like the M1 Garand and Thompson submachine gun. The debate rages through the winter of 1941 to 42. Resources are scarce. Factory capacity is maxed out. Why waste it on an experimental design that might not work? General George Marshall himself has to intervene. The carbine program continues, barely. By early 1943, over 600,000 M1 carbines have been manufactured. Complaints are flooding back from combat zones. North Africa. Insufficient stopping power against determined attackers. Sicily. Failure to penetrate winter uniforms at ranges beyond 100 yards. Guadalcanal. Inadequate for jungle warfare. Request Thompson submachine guns instead. The weapon is getting a reputation, not as terrible, just as mediocre. A compromise that doesn't excel at anything. Officers in the European theater begin requesting their units be issued Garands instead. The carbine becomes associated with rear echelon troops, supply clerks, headquarters staff, people who aren't expected to actually fight. By mid-1944, serious proposals circulate to cancel further production. Then comes the Hürtgen Forest. September 1944. The Allied advance across Europe has been spectacular. Paris liberated, Belgium freed. The German army reeling back toward the Rhine. General Courtney Hodges, commander of the U.S. First Army, faces a problem. His forces need to reach the Roa River dams, control those dams, and you control flooding that could trap Allied forces further north. The quickest route runs through 50 square miles of dense forest straddling the German-Belgian border. The Hürtgen Forest. From the air, it looks like a dark green carpet. Dense fir trees planted in straight rows by German foresters decades earlier. Neat. Orderly. From the ground, it's something else entirely. The forest is what tankers call tank-proof. Trees packed so tight that armor can't maneuver. Roads that turn to bottomless mud with the first autumn rain, and visibility measured in yards, not miles. The kind of place where infantry fights alone. The U.S. 28th Infantry Division, the Keystone Division, Pennsylvania National Guard, receives the assignment in late October. Push through the forest, capture the town of Schmidt. Major General Norman Dutch Coda commands the division. He's a D-Day veteran, the man who rallied troops on Omaha Beach with the words, "Rangers lead the way, a soldier's soldier." Looking at the maps, Coda sees the challenge immediately. This won't be the kind of warfare Americans excel at. No air support through the canopy, no artillery observation, no tank support, just infantry, fighting at close range in brutal conditions. But intelligence reports suggest German resistance is light, scattered units, low morale. Should be a straightforward operation. Intelligence is wrong. The German 7th Army has transformed the Hürtgen into a defensive nightmare. Bunkers concealed under forest debris. Mines everywhere, not just on trails, but strung up in trees where artillery bursts will detonate them. Pre-registered artillery coordinates covering every clearing. And they're holding it with some of Germany's best remaining units. The 28th Division enters the forest on November 2nd. Within hours, the logs down. Staff Sergeant James Kellerman, 110th Infantry, has been in Europe since July. Normandy, northern France. He's 23 years old, from Scranton, Pennsylvania, worked in a coal mine before the war. Comfortable in tight, dark spaces where most men panic. The forest reminds him of the mines, that same sense of the walls closing in, that same feeling that you can't see what's coming. His squad moves in a staggered column, trying to maintain contact in the dense undergrowth. Every man carries an M1 Garand except Kellerman. As a squad leader and radio operator, he was issued an M1 Carbine, lighter, easier to carry. He'd wanted a Garand, now he's stuck with the typewriter. 0847 hours, the first contact. Muzzle flashes through the trees, maybe 40 yards ahead. The squad drops. Kellerman brings the carbine to his shoulder, fires twice. The rifle's report is sharp, almost flat. Nothing like the thunderous bang of a Garand. He works the trigger smoothly. One of the carbine's advantages he's learned. Fast follow-up shots. A German soldier staggers, falls. Around him, the squad's Garands roar. Deeper sound, more authority. But then something happens that will define the next 48 hours. Private Morrison's Garand jams. Bolt locked halfway back. He cycles the action frantically. Nothing. The mechanism is fouled with mud from a fall 30 minutes earlier. Private Chen's Browning automatic rifle fires a 6-round burst, then stops cold. The magazine release is frozen in the cold rain. He can't drop the empty magazine. A Corporal Davies gets 3 shots off before his Garand's trigger assembly simply stops working. Some internal component sheared off. In 30 seconds, Kellerman's 8-man squad has gone from 8 weapons to 4 functioning rifles, and the Germans are moving closer. Kellerman burns through 2 15-round magazines, 30 shots in maybe 20 seconds. The carbine's recoil is negligible. He can stay on target through the entire magazine. The action cycles smoothly, ejects the spent brass, feeds the next round. No hiccups, no hesitation. He reloads, fires, reloads again. The Germans pull back. The squad checks their weapons. Morrison field strips his Garand in the mud, trying to clear the action. Chen finally breaks his magazine free using a knife as a pry bar. Davies discovers his trigger housing has cracked. The rifle is out of action until they can find a replacement part. Kellerman's carbine works fine, and he notices something else. He's not exhausted. The carbine weighs 5.5 pounds loaded. After carrying it for 6 hours through dense forest, his arms aren't screaming. Compare that to the 9-pound Garand, which feels like 15 pounds after a full day's march. They move forward. By nightfall, something is very wrong throughout the entire division. November 2nd, 22:30 hours. 28th Division Headquarters, Graz, Germany. The reports coming in don't make sense. Multiple companies reporting weapons failures at rates far beyond normal. Not just individual rifles malfunctioning, entire platoons losing combat effectiveness because half their weapons won't function. The problem is environmental. The Hürtgen Forest creates perfect conditions for weapons failures. Cold rain mixed with mud creates a grinding paste that works into every mechanism. Soldiers diving for cover in firefights drag their rifles through the muck. The M1 Garand, magnificent weapon in normal conditions, has tight tolerances. When mud gets into the action, it turns into dead weight. The Browning automatic rifle is worse. 20 pounds gas-operated mechanism exposed to the elements. In sustained fighting, the barrels overheat, then cool rapidly in the rain. Metal warps. Feeding issues multiply. Even the Thompson submachine gun, supposedly built for rough conditions, is jamming. The stick magazines crack in the cold. The simple blowback action should be reliable, but soldiers are discovering that simple doesn't mean immune to mud. But scattered throughout the division are soldiers carrying M1 Carbine, and their weapons keep working. The carbine's short-stroke gas piston system is almost completely sealed. Minimal exposure to the elements. The action is looser than a Garand's, which accuracy purists hate. But in the mud, that looseness becomes an advantage. Dirt that would jam a Garand just rattles around in a carbine and gets ejected with the spent brass. The 15-round magazines are smaller, lighter, easier to keep dry. The detachable magazine design means if one magazine fails, you just grab another. The Garand's on-block 8-round clip system means if the clip feed mechanism fails, your rifle is out of action. By November 3rd morning, something unprecedented is happening. Soldiers are trading their Garands for carbine. November 3rd, 5:45 hours. Cold Trail, Hürtgen Forest. Staff Sergeant Kellerman's company has been tasked with holding a critical trail junction. It's not much, just 2 dirt paths crossing in a small clearing. But it's the only route available for supply vehicles trying to reach the forward units. Lose this junction and the entire regiment gets cut off. Intelligence estimates light German presence, maybe a squad or 2. Intelligence is wrong again. At dawn, 2 companies of German infantry, nearly 300 men, hit the junction from 3 sides. Kellerman's company has 84 men. They're outnumbered more than 3 to 1. The Germans attack through the trees, using the dense cover to get within grenade range before the Americans can bring concentrated fire to bear. It becomes a close-quarters nightmare. Ranges under 50 yards, often under 20. Soldiers firing at muzzle flashes and movement in the gray dawn light. The American line starts to buckle, and then the weapons failures cascade. Garand after Garand jams. The Marines have a saying about the M1. It's the best rifle in the world if you keep it clean. In the Hürtgen mud, keeping anything clean is impossible. The Browning automatic rifles, the squad-level firepower advantage American infantry depends on, start failing. One after another, they fire a magazine and then seize up, barrels hot enough to boil water, then doused with freezing rain. Kellerman watches his company's firepower collapse in real time, but he's got the carbine and it keeps firing. He burns through magazine after magazine. The shallow depth of the carbine's receiver means he can reload by feel without taking his eyes off the tree line. 15 rounds, reload. 15 rounds, reload. The carbine doesn't have the range of a Garand, but in the forest, nothing is beyond 200 yards anyway. It doesn't have the stopping power of a .3006 round, but at 75 yards, the .30 carbine cartridge hits hard enough. What it does have is reliability, and in the Hürtgen Forest, that's worth more than raw power. 6:23 hours, the German attack falters. Not because they're taking massive losses, but because they're encountering sustained resistance from positions they expected to overrun quickly. The Germans assume that if American weapons are failing, the defense will collapse. But pockets of resistance are holding. Squad leaders with carbines, officers with carbines, radio operators, medics, weapons crew members, all the soldiers issued the rear echelon rifle. The soldiers everyone thought wouldn't be doing the real fighting. In 06:47 hours, German reinforcements arrive. A fresh company, pushing hard up the Cole Trail. If they take the junction, the entire American position in this sector collapses. Kellerman's down to 43 men, still combat effective. The others are wounded, weaponless, or pinned down. He does something that will later appear in after-action reports with a small note. Unverified, recommend further investigation. He organizes every soldier with functioning carbine, 17 men total, into a makeshift firebase. The carbine's lightweight means soldiers can carry double the normal ammunition load. Each man has 200 rounds or more. The magazines are interchangeable. If one man runs dry, someone tosses him a fresh magazine. They set up in a collapsed bunker with a clear view down the trail approach. And when the Germans come, those 17 carbines deliver more sustained firepower than would normally come from a full-strength rifle platoon. The Germans take the weight of fire as evidence of a much larger force. They pull back to reassess. That pause is enough. American reinforcements and working weapons arrive by 0830 hours. The junction holds, but what happened there starts rippling through the entire division. By November 4th, every officer in the 28th Division knows about the carbines. Field commanders start requesting carbine-equipped units for critical missions, not because the carbine is superior to the Garand in doctrine or specification, but because in the Hürtgen Forest it works. Soldiers start writing home about the little rifle that saved our lives, letters that military censors read with increasing interest. The Ordnance Department receives urgent cables from the European theater, requests immediate shipment of additional M1 carbines to replace combat losses. Combat losses. The carbine is supposed to be a secondary weapon. Now entire units are requesting it as primary armament. Report extraordinary reliability of M1 carbine in adverse conditions. Request analysis of design features that provide this advantage. The same weapon they wanted to cancel is suddenly the subject of engineering studies. By November 10th, when the 28th Division is finally pulled out of the Hürtgen Forest, having suffered over 6,000 casualties in 9 days of fighting, something fundamental has shifted. The M1 carbine's reputation is transformed, not among procurement officers or analysts, among the soldiers who carried it. December 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. When the Germans launched their massive counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge, American units are overrun in the initial assault. Thousands of soldiers are cut off, surrounded, fighting desperately with whatever weapons still function in the snow and freezing temperatures. The M1 carbine becomes the most requested weapon among isolated units. Why? Because when you're surrounded and can't get resupply, a rifle that doesn't jam is worth more than a rifle that hits harder. Because when you're retreating through snow and forest, a weapon that weighs half as much as a Garand means you can carry twice as much ammunition. Because when vehicles are destroyed and you're moving on foot, every pound matters. The carbine's weaknesses, lack of range, reduced stopping power, are irrelevant in close quarters forest fighting. Its strengths, reliability, weight, magazine capacity are everything. January 1945, the Ordnance Department quietly drops all discussion of canceling carbine production. By February, production is actually increased, not because some general made a decree, because soldiers in the field are requesting it. The ultimate endorsement. What happened to Kellerman? He survived the Hürtgen Forest, survived the Bulge, made it to the Rhine crossing in March 1945. He carried that same M1 carbine, serial number 34653, through the entire campaign. It never jammed, never broke. He cleaned it when he could. That wasn't often. Mostly he just kept firing it. After the war, he went back to Scranton, back to the coal mines. He didn't talk much about what happened in the forest. Most veterans didn't. But in 1958, When the Army conducted an oral history project about weapons performance in World War II, Kellerman agreed to an. The transcript is stored at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. One section stands out. They asked me after the war what I thought about the carbine. I told them the truth. It wasn't the best rifle we had, wasn't the most powerful, wasn't the most accurate, but when I needed it to work, it worked. In the forest, when everything else was falling apart, that little rifle kept going. A lot of us came home because of it. Maybe the brass didn't understand what we needed, but whoever designed that thing, whoever built it, they understood. The M1 Carbine went on to become one of the most produced military firearms in American history. Over 6 million manufactured between 1942 and 1945. It served in Korea, where its lightweight made it popular with paratroopers and officers. It appeared in Vietnam, where aging surplus carbines were issued to South Vietnamese forces. Variants are still in use with military and police forces around the world. But the real story isn't in the production numbers. It's in what the carbine represents, the gap between what military planners think soldiers need and what soldiers actually need in combat. The Ordnance Department wanted the carbine to fit a neat category, light rifle for rear echelon personnel, something between a pistol and a rifle. The soldiers of the 28th Division didn't care about categories, they cared about survival. They discovered that in the worst conditions imaginable, conditions that broke superior weapons, the overlooked, undervalued carbine kept working. The weapon America wanted to cancel became the weapon that wouldn't quit. David Marshall Williams, the ex-convict designer who created the revolutionary gas system, never received the recognition he deserved during his lifetime. He passed away in 1975, largely forgotten outside firearms enthusiast circles. Major Rene Studler, who fought to keep the carbine program alive, retired as a colonel in 1955. His vision of a new category of infantry weapon was vindicated, but the credit went to others. And somewhere in Scranton, Pennsylvania, there's probably still a storage box in someone's attic containing letters from the Hürtgen Forest. Letters describing mud and cold and fear and a little rifle that never stopped working. The M1 Carbine reminds us that warfare rarely unfolds according to plan. The best weapon isn't always the most powerful. Sometimes it's the one that works when everything else fails. American military planners in 1940 couldn't predict the Hürtgen Forest, couldn't foresee fighting in conditions that would break their mainline combat rifles, couldn't imagine rear echelon troops becoming frontline fighters. But Major Studler understood something essential. War is chaos, and in chaos, reliability beats performance. The rifle America wanted to cancel ended up saving thousands of lives, not because it was revolutionary, but because it was reliable. The next time you hear about an obsolete weapon or outdated technology, remember the M1 Carbine. Remember the Hürtgen Forest. Sometimes the solution isn't more powerful. Sometimes it's just something that works. For the soldiers of the 28th Infantry Division who fought in the Hürtgen Forest between November 2nd, 1944, over 6,000 became casualties in the bloodiest divisional engagement in U.S. Army history. Their sacrifice and the weapons they carried should never be forgotten.